All right, Jazakallah Anas for the introduction and giving us an overview of Aware Muslim. So when we were trying to create the advertisement for this event, we were thinking, what would be a good way to title this event? And so we thought, what's the thing that we thought about, it came to us when we were brainstorming it, I hope it's not a Muslim, right? That's all, whenever we hear about this attack, we always go through this mentally because we know that there'll be, we'll see Islam dragged through the mud, through the media, they'll say untruths about Islam. And then also, as we've seen, there's been a rise in attacks on Muslims. Like, I don't know if you guys heard, but in McMaster, the sisters, they had to move out because this is something to do with the knife being stuck in a wall, so they felt threatened. So this is the kind of things we see. And subhanAllah, after we came up with that advertisement, the San Bernardino shootings happened. And it's automatic. Like, I don't know, for me it was automatic. It went through my mind, I hope it's not a Muslim. Right? And it's like, it's a tragic state of affairs that we've kind of come to. So what I wanted to discuss today, inshallah, as Anas outlined, was that we're going to look at some background in the media. Like, in a sense, like, let's look at, we'll look at the media biases in Islam. We'll kind of look into that into a little bit deeper, and we'll cover it to a certain level in the presentation. And if you have questions, we can go over them after. Then we'll look at how not to respond, and then how to respond, which is basically the 4 C's, breaking it down and elaborating on what Anas outlined. So, first section is the media system. So, actually, when I was preparing this presentation, I came across this, and this was actually an anti-Islamophobia campaign they were doing in New York. If you actually read it, says here, "Beware, the Muslims are coming, and they shall strike you with hugs so fierce you'll end up calling your grandmother and telling you you love her." So I was it was one of those attempts, like, if you had joined us for our first presentation, those was kind of the ideas that we had, is that, like, we could do maybe a billboard campaign, and that's what they were trying to do, is trying to, break these kind of stereotypes. So when we explore the media biases against Islam, and we all know this is not something shocking, it's not something that you're going to learn about in this presentation, it's something we all know, right? But just to, give an example, just to get us started, is that I wanted to first show how they cover when a non-Muslim does an attack and when a Muslim does an attack. So if you look at when the Planned Parenthood attack happened, what you notice about this cover is there's no mention of the Planned Parenthood attack, right? Because it was a white American, maybe he's Christian, maybe he's not, doesn't really matter, that did the attack. And that's the front cover. They talk about some guy stealing a Christmas tree or something like that. This is the cover of the same newspaper when allegedly Muslims shot up people in the San Bernardino, right? And the lawyer for the families has a lot of questions how a 90-pound woman can, use an assault rifle. But anyways, these are the things with these types of attacks. So the question is in a sense, is why? Why is Islam covered in this way, right? And it really, what we need to kind of unpack in our minds is really what the purpose of the media is, right? Remember, if you joined us for our talk last month, we talked about the schooling system and what is the purpose of the schooling system, which is, just briefly, it's to create conformity and obedience, right? That's really the purpose of the schooling system, not necessarily to educate. Yeah, you want people reading, maybe, but the bigger reason here is to conform and to obey, right? And so we have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of the media? And one of the books that I actually, I started when I started becoming politically active. One of the first books I read was actually on this topic, and it's called Manufacturing Consent, and it's by Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman, which I'm sure a lot of us have heard of. And so when you go through that book, Noam Chomsky actually explains what is the origins of the media system. And so it actually, back before the World War II, was referred to as propaganda. And one of the key architects of the system, his name is Edward Bernays. And he wrote a book called Propaganda in the 30s approximately. And Edward Bernays, what he was one of the people that worked with the US President Woodrow Wilson in World War I to transform America from a peace-loving nation, because they were pacifists, they didn't want to get into the war with England, get involved with England fighting the Germans. And then he transformed that and he used propaganda to actually whip up the sentiments against the Germans, right? So they'd have stuff like, they showed German soldiers eating Belgian baby hands, right? So, these Germans are evil because they eat babies, right? And if you remember, they recycled this propaganda in 1991, right? With when they had which turned out to be the U.S. and the Kuwaiti ambassador to the U.S. She was saying that Saddam Hussein was in 1991 was taking babies out of incubators and smashing them on the floor, which was a complete lie, right? So maybe there's not a lot of creativity in propaganda, but you get the idea, right? Like they just reduce, reuse, and recycle. So when this book Propaganda, you actually can buy it on Amazon. You can buy this on Amazon, and a lot of people who are critiques of the media, you can get there. And when you open up the book and actually go to the first page, you don't have to go past the first page, you'll find this quote, which I'm going to go over with you. And it says, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinion of the masses is an important element of democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of. This is the logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized, right? So what he's talking about here is something you associate maybe with Nazi Germany, maybe with Soviet communist Russia, but it's actually with the way the media system in the capitalist democratic nations. This is what the design principle is. And so Edward Bernays, he's actually one of the founders of the public relations industry. So like when they wanted to fight labor and things like that, they would hire this man. So this man's not a nobody. He's actually one of the things. And if you're interested in reading more or watching a documentary, watch The Century of the Self. It's a BBC documentary. It goes over his ideas. But if you really want to, read it from the horse's mouth, check out this book, Propaganda. So in that book I told you about before, about manufacturing consent, there's worthy and unworthy victims, which is they cover how the media reports, two equal kind of situations. So what I'm going to highlight in this example, and there's tons of examples in the book, but in the book what they highlight is how, and this was written in the early 90s, late 80s, so this is when communism was around. So they cover how when religious Christian people were killed by communists and how they were killed by a pro-US client, which is El Salvador. So Jerzy Populescu, he was killed by the Polish priests, by the Polish authorities, and then they had about 78 articles about that in the papers, and about 1,200 column inches, right? Now, how did the press cover the death of 4 white American nuns, right? And it's important that if you think about it, you would think that, the average American would think these people are innocent. I mean, America, let's face it, is racist. I mean, if you watch how they kill black people and other people of color, you know that they have problems with, if they were black, you could say, oh, it's because they're black, that's why, that's the issue. But no, these are white American Christian nuns, they're not Muslim at all, right? And so how did the press cover it? Only 8 articles. Only 118 column inches. Basically roughly about 10% of the coverage, right? So this is one example that shows it's that, that this is the role of the media is to create that public opinion for elite policies, right? They want to fight communism, so make the communists look like, pure evil. Make labor activists in South America, which the nuns were part of that labor movement in El Salvador, and this is just like kind of the tip of the iceberg. It doesn't get into how many other, Spanish priests and things like local that were Portuguese priests that were killed in South America. I think there was roughly about 200,000 people were killed in that war, which was sponsored by the U.S. And if you remember the U.S. invasion of Iraq, there was these, the Americans had trained death squads, right? They trained death squads so that they would create violence between the Sunni and the Shia. That actually came from South America. They imported this idea, they used the same kind of concept that were used against these religious figures and Christians in South America. They actually used it in the Muslim world. So one of the most important things is to realize is that the media is not fair and balanced. That's not the objective of the media. So we shouldn't hit our heads on the wall saying, why don't they care about the truth? Why don't they care about the real Islam? Like, that should not be in our mind, because as you can see, they don't care about whether it's Muslims or Christians or whatever. what their focus is to sell a certain agenda, sell a certain foreign policy. As Edward Bernays says, to mold the minds, right? That is the purpose of the media. So the question is, what is the elite's agenda with the Muslim world, right? Because if that's really what's driving the policy, let's kind of unpack and look at what the elite policy is towards the Muslim world. And I guess in a word, it'd be colonialism, right? That is kind of the outlook of, just as they have a colonial outlook to South America, they have a similar outlook to the Muslim world, right? So, and this is best probably summarized by Robert Fowler, who was a Canadian diplomat, and when he was kind of expressing his frustration with Canadians, because Canadians don't like the war in Afghanistan, they were very happy when Canada didn't go into the Iraq war, the masses, the average, Canadian. It says, we are simply not prepared to foot the massive price of blood and treasure which it would take to effectively colonize Afghanistan. So really what he's explaining as a Canadian diplomat, what is the real purpose of the adventures in Afghanistan with the so-called the coalition dwelling, and replace their culture with ours, where that seems to what we seek. So he's explaining what is really the purpose of the war in Afghanistan. It's not to help women, it's not to feed the hungry or anything like that, but rather it's to replace the Islamic culture of Afghanistan with the secular liberal culture of the West. So what are the reasons that, and I'm going to go through about 3 reasons that we can kind of identify why they benefit from demonizing Muslims and making them look like the boogeyman. So one is, and I'd say this is probably the weakest reason, one is distraction, right? They want to distract the Canadian and the American populations from their real problems, right? What's really going on. If you really think about it, and all of us, we work here, we go to work, and it's always budgets are always tight, right? If you notice, there's always perpetually, the economy is perpetually in a problem. There's never a good time for when you're like a regular worker. There's never really any good times kind of things. It's usually, there's always problems, or we gotta cut back on spending, and we can't really hire a friend, right? So the economy is in a perpetual problem. And especially now in Canada, with the oil price gone down to, I think it was $40 a barrel, there's like personal bankruptcies is skyrocketing in Alberta. And what the chief economist in Edmonton is saying is that and he's saying there, it's bolded, this is a disturbing development indeed, that if these personal bankruptcies keep going on, it's going to be big problems for Alberta. And the Albertan, in the real estate market is going down a lot in Alberta because of this problem. So they're going through a crash. So one of the things is that, think about it. Like, are your friends discussing this at work? Are they discussing the rising debt level in Alberta? Or they're discussing San Bernardino, right? They're like discussing this thing. Why? Right? Why is that going on, right? Second thing is that comes, when you think of the Muslim world as, one of the things that comes to your mind is obviously oil, right? That's one of the big things. And so what the U.S. State Department said in October of 1945 is something to the effect of that, Saudi Arabia represents a stupendous source of strategic power, and it's one of the greatest material prizes of all time. So that was in 45. So that's what they set their eyes on Muslim oil back then, in 1945, right, when the British, were crushed by the Nazis. Then America sort of took over the world at that point, and they started eyeing the resources of the world. So one of the reasons is that they are interested in the Muslim world is resources, right? And this was renewed by Carter in 1980, 1970, late 70s, early 80s, when it became to be known as the Carter Doctrine, where he was nice enough to declare that Muslim oil is actually his oil, and saying that if the Russians and the communists decide to annex it, that's a state of war because that's a strategic asset. And then Obama renewed the Carter Doctrine. Like, he basically said the same thing, but just it was not as public. But it's just not oil in the Middle East. The Muslim world altogether, it has 56% of the world's energy resources, right? And this is just in the Middle East. I don't think this includes Central Asia. But there's other resources in the Muslim world. You might not know this, but Uzbekistan is like the 6th largest producer of cotton in the world, right? And the dictator there, don't let his name fool you. It's Islam Karimov, but he hates Islam and Muslims. He is funded by the Russians and the US, and what they do is actually, this practice might have stopped recently, but for until at least 2010, they were using children to pick cotton. They were using children, so they would shut down the schools, and even if you were like a doctor or an engineer, they would make you go pick cotton in the fields, right? This is this is how psychotic, these rulers are that they find in the West, right? So this is one of the other things is that It's not just oil, it's like the Muslim world is rich with resources. Like you might not know this, but Pakistan produces about as much wheat as Canada, right? Again, like not something that, is it's front page, but it's not just oil, it's like the Muslim world is rich by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's leave with resources, right? But there's something else that's unique about Muslims, right? And this is something that we need to talk about, and Anas kind of touched on it. If you look at when Obama, when he was hosted by his buddy Mubarak, when he would address the Muslim world, he was addressing the Muslim world. Like he wasn't addressing Buddhists or Hindus, right? When you look at the think tanks, the Brookings and the Rand corporations and Harvard, they're producing books about Islam. Things to like, how do we support modern Muslim networks? How do we make civil democratic Muslims, right? Why are they talking about civil democratic Buddhists? Why are they not talking about building modern Russian networks, right? What distinguishes a Muslim Ummah? And obviously, it's Islam, right? That's what distinguishes us, right? When you look at what's going on in Syria, and you see how the nations are uniting on crushing the Syria. Like if you know that Russia's not bombing ISIS. Russia's bombing the other territories that are opposing the, Bashar al-Assad. They're bombing them, right? And it's all the nations are uniting. America, Iran, Turkey, all of them are working together. China is all working to crush this uprising. Why? Because the Muslims wanted Islam. They want Bashar al-Assad gone, and they want it replaced by something Islamic, right? That is what the West is disturbed about. The West doesn't care about ISIS, right? The West doesn't care about that, right? That's just a simple problem to deal with, right? But what is a problem is the Ummah. The Ummah wants Islam, right? And if you look at Islam, what is unique about it is that, yes, capitalism answers questions, but about why we're here, right? Capitalism does answer those questions, but they answer it incorrectly. And I'll give you an example. Because, as Anas mentioned, one of the things we do is we talk about, we go, as people in the Aware Muslim group, we talk to non-Muslims and try to do dawah with the wider Canadian society. So I was talking to one guy who I met when I was doing some contracting, and what he told me, as someone, he's an environmentalist and an activist in those kind of circles, and he said one of the biggest pressing concerns for the West right now is euthanasia. Right? That is a current kind of, sort of, if you will, like a moral problem that the West is kind of wrestling with. Because of the baby boomers. They're getting old, they're getting sick, they're feeling pain, right? So what people are saying is that I have the right to kill myself, because if I'm in this much pain and I'm not going to recover for it, I'm old, I should just be able to have doctor-assisted suicide, right? Now if you look at Islam, even when you're in pain, it has answers of why you should live. Right? That's what I mean. It has the right answers to those questions. I knew a convert who converted to Islam because she had this pain condition, right? And one of the things was that if she had stayed secular, she would have killed herself. That's actually what she told her father to do. So actually, to shoot herself in the head because what's the point of living in this life if it's just about if it's just about having fun, and you can't have fun anymore, because that's what the West kind of offers, right? Then what's the point of life, right? So Islam answers those fundamental questions correctly. That's one of the things about Islam that the elites have a problem with. The other thing is it builds solidarity. Now I'm sure everyone here in this room cares about Palestine, right? But I just want to kind of, let's just, because we take that as a given, right? But just kind of peel that back for a second. Look at some of myself. I was born here. I grew up in Etobicoke, west side of Toronto. If you look at me and the other kids, why did I care about Palestine and they didn't? Like, what's the difference? We went to the same schools, we watched the same TV, we did the same things, we bought the same toys, right? Well, why did me here in this Toronto, so far away, I'm not, my parents are from India, I'm not related by blood to Palestinians, at least that I don't know of. So why do I care about Palestine? Because Islam says that you should, right? Islam says it gives you that kind of general, that builds that brotherhood. Like, I will cry over the death of Muslims, even though I'm not related to them, right? I'm not related to them. And honest commentators, when the media has those kind of breaks, they're like shocked when they see you help this person and you're not related to them. I remember watching footage in the early days of the Syrian uprising when this man went to rescue a woman And he wasn't related to her. The CNN reporter was like, why would you do something like, the snipers would have killed you, right? And it's like, then he didn't, to him it was like a non-issue. It's like, well, this is just what we have to do, right? So this kind of idea of how Islam builds solidarity is a problem, right? Because when you look into the practices of the West, one of the things that they rely on in terms of controlling their populations is atomization. Atomization. A lot of these, like what it does is that they try to keep people apart from each other, individuals. Like, you worry about your problem, you worry about your problem. Individualism, right? Break apart the unions, break apart any type of communal kind of organization. The other thing about Islam is that it has a concept of sharing. We all know this as Muslims, right? Like when it's a normal scene when you go for dinner with a brother, you fight each other to pay for the bill, right? Like that's just normal. And when the other brother's saying to split the bill, you're kind of wondering, this guy's a little bit, so what's wrong with him? What's wrong with him? Why, you feel like there's something wrong, there's something lacking in his Islamic culture, right? That you wouldn't take that as a sign of, as someone who has Islamic character, right? So this idea of sharing, even at a minute level, like and this is one a good thing, when you take someone for coffee and you want to talk to them about Islam, make sure you pay, where you buy, even better when you take them for dinner, make sure you pay the bill, right? Because this is part of the hospitality that the Muslim world is famous for. And that's what, when non-Muslims, when they're hosted in the Muslim world, they're kind of surprised, right? When they realize all this propaganda is just that propaganda. How Muslims host them and they don't have that hatred towards them, right? Like, it's amazing, right? And then just to, in terms of the Sharia, like what, zakat, like the idea of asset taxes, where the rich would give away their assets. Like think about Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him. Like when he fought for the zakat, like he was someone from the elite, right? Like he was Quraysh, he was elite. But when he was fighting the war for the people who said we don't have to pay zakat, he was fighting to get the money from the rich people to give it to the poor people, right? Like when does that happen, right? That's something unique to Islam, right? Also, there's another hadith which is not well known, to the best of my knowledge, is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the people are partners in three things: the water, the feeding pastures, and the fire. So the ijtihad of the fire, going back to those oil resources, right, is that the Ummah collectively owns those resources, right? So even when you look at here, like the gas prices have fallen. But if I remember when the gas prices initially were going up, they're still gouging us big time at the pump, right? Like the prices haven't fallen as, like when the price of oil used to be $40 a barrel, they haven't gone down to that level, right? So when you look at what the capitalist philosophy is that they give the oil rights to the rich, and then they gouge us at the pumps, right? Whereas Islam has a different kind of concept, is that oil wealth should be shared amongst the Ummah. So, just to go back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and examine his dawah and how people react to him, you'll see that he faced similar issues from the Quraysh for similar reasons, right? Is that Quraysh was, this is a quote when they went to Abu Talib, it says, "Oh Abu Talib, your nephew curses our gods and finds faults with our way of life, mocks at our religion, and degrades our forefathers." So they're talking about way of life, they're talking about forefathers. So they too had a problem with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam because he offered an alternative to Quraysh, right? Like if you remember Zayd bin Nufayl, may Allah be pleased with him, who came before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If you remember his story, he's one who he went to the Christians, he went to the Jews, and he said that these guys aren't on the true deen, and he called himself on the way of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And he used to, kind of be a moral person. Like he used to say, don't bury your daughters, let me raise them. And if you want them back when they're older, no problem, I'll give them back to you. Don't worship idols, right? So he used to do that. But the difference is he wasn't offering an alternative, right? That's why they had a problem with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he was extending his call and saying that his call was to go after, as to offer Islam as an alternative to the Quraysh tribal kind of system. And so when you look at the propaganda that Walid ibn Mughira settled on, was that he was a sorcerer with words, right? That if you talk to him, all of a sudden you'll go crazy, and you won't want anything to do with your dad, you won't want anything to do with your brother, you won't want anything to do with your wife. That's the kind of propaganda that the Quraysh said. Because if you think about it, what's the logic of that propaganda, right? Like imagine you're at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Quraysh, you're talking to the Quraysh, and they're saying, watch out for this guy. So they, in a sense, they don't respect your intelligence. Right? They don't respect who you are, right? They don't think that they think that what they're trying, the image they're trying to create of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that he's this weird, crazy person that has these magical powers almost, that if you talk to him, you'll lose your mind and you become like some kind of weird zombie, right? That's essentially the claim, right? Is that any really different than what they're proposing right now about us? This is the idea of the internet jihad. You must have heard this. So this is alhamdulillah, I couldn't believe I found this picture. But what it is that it's this idea that you go online and you get self-radicalized, or you get radicalized by online media, right? It's this idea that somehow we as Muslims are weird creatures, right? Because we can just go online and all of a sudden these words will come into our mind and we'll go freaking crazy, right? We'll just shoot up a ball or something, right? Because everyone else is normal, right? Not like Breivik, as Anas mentioned. Breivik, no. He didn't go online and get those words into his head and go shoot up people, right? But the thing is that the ultimate goal of this propaganda is Islam will make you lose your mind, so stay away. Stay away from Islam, right? So it's like kind of like, it's this weird thing, like when you unpack it, makes no sense whatsoever, right? And that's what, like when you look at Tufail al-Mawli, when he accepted Islam, like they offered him the cotton in the ears, right? And alhamdulillah, let's leave some of the Quran when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was reciting the Quran and kind of went through the cotton. And he's like, I'm an intelligent man, I can figure this out for myself. And he pulled the cotton out from his ears, and then he listened to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So that's in a sense that when you're talking to people, I'll get to this in terms of how, when you're talking to people, that's the kind of person you're looking for. Someone at least is willing to give you a chance. If someone's like, who's that guy, the anti-Muslim guy we were talking about?
Robert Spencer?
Yeah, if someone's like Robert Spencer, probably best to move along, right? Because that guy, it doesn't matter how much you talk to him, he's not going to work with you. So just to go over it quickly, the media is propaganda. Media is propaganda, and that's something that should be understood. In fact, Hitler said in Mein Kampf, the reason we lost World War I is because we could not do propaganda like the British and the Americans. Propaganda is actually invented by liberal democracy, not by fascists, not by communists. They just imitated. That's why they didn't do such a good job. Right? So the media system is propaganda. Don't expect justice from the system, the media system. It will never present Islam correctly, right? Unless there's some kind of interest in doing that, right? And sometimes you see that, right? Like when you saw the atrocities in Bosnia, because it was an elite interest to get NATO into Bosnia, right? So because we saw those atrocities, and first time we saw Muslims as humans, was in that war, because it served their interest to reassert NATO's place in Europe after the Cold War collapsed, right? So sometimes you see that kind of thing come through.
Can we make a quick request?
Yeah.
I interrupt you. The Imam of this masjid, he wants to address the audience, but he has to leave very soon.
Okay.
Can I interrupt your talk for maybe 2 minutes?
Yeah, I'm just going to get to the end of the slide, and then
Okay.
you can.
Inshallah.
So I'm just wrapping up this slide, and then I'll pass it back to you, inshallah. So the elite wants Ummah's resources, but the big thing is that the elites recognize Islam as a competitor. When they talk about the battle of hearts and minds, what are they talking about, right? Battle of hearts and minds for what? Either you worship your desires or you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was targeted by the media in a similar way for similar reasons. So it's important to realize this is not the first time this has happened, and we should, in a sense, gather our strength. It should be like a source of inspiration. That wow, like we're going through the same thing that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahabas went through. They used to face similar kind of charges, and I'll talk about more of that when I get into some of the later slides. So inshallah,